Hello everyone. Welcome to Introducing Self-Service Alerting Part 3. This is the third of a three-part series that's talking about some new capabilities that are available in SQL Server 2012 as part of SQL Server Business Intelligence. My name is Łukasz Pawłowski. I'm a program manager in the reporting services team. I'm really excited to be showing you these presentations because over the last 2 years or so, I've been working to bring this capability out to market. And so it's really nice to be able to have you all be able to start using this capability and start getting some of the benefits. This is the third of a three-part series. In the first part, we talked about the overall why you would want to use self-service alerting, and we showed a deep demo of the actual alerting capability. In the second part, we delved into the actual details, both at the feature level and also at the architecture level. In this part, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on the IT administrator, what self-service alerting means to the IT administrator. Also, we're going to be focusing on some of the background material that you need to understand alerts. In the previous part, which is part 2, we actually talked about data feeds, and we're going to be using this time to talk more in detail about data feeds and what they mean to you. So let's dive in. Before we get too far, let's remember what we're doing with reporting and alerting within SQL Server 2012. So within the self-service alerting capability is one of the capabilities we're adding to reporting services within SQL Server 2012. It's important to include the broader picture. So within SQL Server, we're looking at empowering information workers through self-service business intelligence in a self-service yet managed way. And so we're doing that in 3 major investments in SQL Server 2012. The first is around providing extremely compelling visualizations in a highly interactive way. That's a new Power View tool that we are providing that allows information workers to just take the data they've created using Power Pivot or tabular models stored in analysis services and really get breakthrough insight through those. We've also added a lot of work around increasing efficiency. So we integrated reporting services as a SharePoint shared service, and this is going to make a tremendous increase or tremendous benefit for IT pros who are trying to deploy reporting services integrated with SharePoint mode. In this presentation, we'll be focusing on proactive intelligence, however, which is where end-user alerting and self-service alerting really fits in. This is the ability for information workers to create data alerts when to react to data changes that matter to them. Really focusing on making it very, very easy for information workers to create alert rules and to create them that are really relevant to their own needs so that they can drive their own productivity and also so that they can actually have a safety net to deal with information overload that they're commonly experiencing today. So now, let's dive into alerting for the IT admin. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a demo. So if you've been with us for part 1 and 2, if you haven't watched those, I highly recommend that you go watch those. You've seen how we create alerts. We see how we manage alerts for information workers and also for site admins. We also talked about what the features are, what the architecture is. Now let's go take a look at some of the ways that IT interacts with alerts. So let's go and do that. So first we're going to talk a little bit about SharePoint Central Admin for reporting services. We're going to talk about the alerting runtime database and what that means. And we're going to talk about the execution log for alerts. Okay? So let's dive into it. So first, let me start with SharePoint Central Admin. So I've already launched SharePoint Central Admin here. And what you'll notice here immediately is that there's nothing that says reporting services yet. And so let's go into Manage Service Applications. If I'm a SharePoint administrator, I'm very comfortable with this view. And I know that all my SharePoint applications, or service applications, are managed here. And what I'll draw your attention to is this one that's called pre-release. I'm using a build that's almost the release build for this demo. And you'll see SQL Server Reporting Services application and its proxy. Remember, when we deploy reporting services, there's 2 components, right? There's a web front-end component, which we also sometimes call the proxy, and there's a back-end component, or a middle-tier component, which is our shared service application. So you can manage both here. If I click in on this, what you'll see that all of the reporting services specific configuration settings are managed right here. either here or through PowerShell, and they're all stored in the config DB. There's a very small subset of settings that's still stored in a configuration file, but for the most part, you'll be using this UI here or PowerShell scripts to configure reporting services. Most of the items on this list you will be familiar with if you've used reporting services in the past. I'm not going to dive into them. What I wanted to focus, though, is I want to talk about provisioning subscriptions and alerts. One important aspect is that now that reporting services is part of the shared service application infrastructure, the databases and the SQL layer for the report server is managed by SharePoint. And what that means is that we have to make sure that we're correctly configured. SQL Server Agent, for example, has to be running. So when I come into this page, on the right-hand side here, you'll actually see that SQL Server Agent is running. If it was not running, there would be, you would see this in red here, and you would be able to go and you'd be able to go ahead and start it. I think that's an important thing, is that when you're using alerting, you have to have SQL Server enabled. The second piece is that you have to grant the report server permission to use SQL Agent. And so here we provide you the ability to either download the script and run it on your own. So download the T-SQL statements that you need, run them in Management Studio on your own. Or if you provide a username and password that has the sufficient permissions on the underlying SQL server, we'll go ahead and do that for you. Okay, so this is an important step when you're managing alerts, right? This is in terms of getting going. Great. So now, that's kind of the central admin experience, right? Everything's in here, everything's available either through here or through PowerShell scripts. Great. Now let's talk a little bit about the alerting databases. Now, the alert database, I've just opened up Management Studio. And Management Studio is the tool for viewing databases. And I've connected to the SQL server that hosts my reporting services databases and all of my SharePoint databases. And what you'll see first here is that I've expanded out this particular node, which is the report service alerting database. Now you'll notice that there's a GUID in this database. And the reason I point this out is because this is SharePoint's way of managing databases. So when you create a shared service application in SharePoint, it will go and create databases. And we've actually integrated our databases with SharePoint's overall backup and restore mechanism and so forth, so you get all of those great SharePoint manageability benefits now in SQL Server 2012 as well. Now we added a new database here for alerting. And the reason we did that, and let's review what's actually stored in there first, right? So we have two things that get stored in here. One is the alert definitions. So all of the metadata related to alerts gets stored here. Also, this is the database in which we execute alerts. So this is where we're going to be running the data feed. We're going to be storing that data in this database. We're going to be using T-SQL to process the alert rules within this database. Okay? And that's important for you as an IT admin, because when we execute the alert rules, we're going to be using a lot more memory than you've seen used by our other report database, the catalog or the TempDB. So that's something for you to keep in mind when you're thinking about how to provision these servers to be successful with alerting. Now, within the alerting database, we follow the same pattern and the same principle that we have for all the reporting databases, that manipulating these databases, going into the actual tables and inserting things and editing things is just, it's not supported. The one thing we do support, however, is the execution log. This is an important aspect. It's here under views, inside the alerting database, it's under views and execution log. And this is the execution log where we will store all of the activities we're doing with alerts, all the way from creation to deletion, and including all the processing or execution of those alerts. Okay. So now let's take a look at some of the data that's available here. So now I've just expanded this query. This is on the execution log. Let's go ahead and make that a little bit bigger so perhaps you can see. And this is just the default query that is generated. And let's take a look at some of the data that's in here. So what you'll see first off is that we have extremely detailed execution log. We have a series of events. Now this is just our way of managing the asynchronous execution of alerts, or the asynchronous nature of the alerts. You can see when the event was added, when it was deleted, when it was updated, when it actually ran. And you're able to then track all the activities at a very granular level. I won't go into the nature of what all these things mean in this presentation. It's a little bit more advanced than this topic. Let's scroll over here. I want to point out a number of things, right? So first off, there's a bunch of identifying information in each one of these rows that help you as an IT admin understand what's happening within your system. First off, you see the alert definition ID, and this allows you to know which alert definitions are having trouble, right? Or if there is trouble, or which ones are running more often. You're able to see the actual the owner for that subscription. So in this case, it's all system account. But if I had a number of users running, I'd actually see the domain / alias or whatever the username is for that user, and that way you can narrow down which users are running more alerts than others, which users are running into problems, and you can be very proactive around what's happening with your alerts. Next, you will see the report URL. So this allows you to know exactly which reports are the ones that are being used most often within alerts. And so as an IT admin, that helps you identify which ones you can optimize in order to get a higher throughput and an overall better experience for your users. And the last one is the and also this report URL will include the report parameter values that were used to run the alert. And that's very important because sometimes you need to optimize your reports to run more quickly, especially when lots of users run the same report. So by looking at the parameter values that will be included within this report URL, you'll be able to determine how you can optimize your report executions. So within the report server, we have a capability around building cache refresh plans. So one common thing that we expect a lot of IT admins to do is to look at the data inside this tool, inside this log, figure out which report parameter combinations are the most common and at what time of the day or what time of the week or month those alerts execute. And then create cache refresh plan schedules to make sure the data is available for those reports to minimize overall load on the system. So I think that's one very important thing that as an IT admin you should take away from this presentation, is that this is the place where you want to go, this execution log, to start optimizing your IT environment. And lastly, you get to see exactly what the report path is from the viewpoint of SharePoint, and that will then give you the ability to see which sites are being used more often for alerting and be able to optimize that as well. Okay, so that's a little bit about the execution log. Again, that's a capability that's available inside the alerting database under Views in the execution log view. So now let's take a look at where, if I had to diagnose an error of some sort, where would I go to see that? I think there's several pieces to note, right? So the first one is to see over here. Let's go to the log files. One thing that we've done within reporting services in SQL Server 2012 is we're fully integrated as a SharePoint shared service application. And what that means is that our log files now are also included in all of the SharePoint ULS logs. I won't go into it because it's just a big log file, but you'll notice that we're under program files, common files, Microsoft shared, web server extensions, 14 logs. That's exactly the same place where all of your SharePoint log files will be. Now, if you're nostalgic and you really enjoy our old style log formats, you can actually come in here under Web Services log files, and you'll see all of our reporting services log files just like in the old format that you had today. So we've maintained that kind of compatibility for you. Okay, so and all of the shared service application is installed here under Web Services, so that you'll be able to actually right here, so that you'll be able to manage that just like you do any other shared service application within your environment. Now, I am not going to talk about it in this demo, but we also provide a series of performance counters that allow you to manage your alerts at a higher level, so that you can wire up System Center Operations Manager rules or any other kind of monitoring technology, so that you can monitor those perf counters and make sure that your alerts are performing correctly, whether that's being distributed across all the nodes or not, or any particular node running into challenges. So you'll be able to monitor that as well. Wonderful. Let's come back into the slides. And so now what I showed you in this demo is I showed you, central admin for reporting services. where do you find our configuration settings at a high level, and some specific things around configuring subscriptions and alerts that you're going to need to use as part of getting started with SQL Server 2012. And then we talked about the alerting runtime and the database. We talked about what that database is used for, some of the memory profile impacts, and we also talked about the execution log, where the execution log is stored. I also alluded to the performance counters that we have that allow you to monitor at a higher level. Wonderful. Let's talk a little bit about installation, deployment, and provisioning. Now, it's very important, I've been showing you SharePoint Central Admin. It's really important that you understand, you come away from this presentation, that when we're talking about self-service alerting scenarios in SQL Server 2012, they require SharePoint 2010. And so you're going to need to deploy SharePoint 2010 or move to that, and then you're going to integrate reporting services with that, and then you'll be able to deploy any of your operational reports, and you'll be able to use the alerting capabilities with that. So alerting within this release is not available as part of our native mode. If you're familiar with reporting services, you'll know what that means. In terms of installation and provisioning, self-service alerting, you get it simply by installing reporting services in SharePoint integrated mode. There's no separate install. It's all part of the two installs that you're already familiar with, which is the web front end, which is the RS SharePoint add-in for as on the web front ends, and the shared service application on the back ends. And to get the shared service application, what you do is you actually just run SQL setup, and we have an option in there to install the shared service application. Let's talk about a little bit about configuring, monitoring, and diagnosing alerts. So configuration settings, they're stored in the SharePoint configuration database, and you have two ways of configuring those, either through the UI settings that I showed you or through PowerShell scripts that I did not show you. We provide a library of PowerShell scripts and PowerShell commandlets that allow you to set our configuration settings. There's a very, very small set of extremely advanced configuration settings related to alerting, and those can be found still in the report server configuration file that's installed, and that's in that folder where I showed you where reporting was installed. The last thing to say is that alerting reuses the configuration settings that you have configured for reporting services. So if you've configured email already for your subscriptions, those settings will automatically be used by alerts. There is an ability to customize those, so you can have a different email server for subscriptions and a different one for alerting, but that's a very advanced kind of configuration. I don't expect lots of users to use that. Log files, all the log files are available in the execution log and also in the trace logs. One aspect I did not mention, and at this point I need to call it out, is when a user receives an error message in the UI. So they can either receive an error message when they go to Alert Manager, and they'll see in there a actual little tracking ID as part of the error message. As an IT admin, when you get one of those tracking IDs, you can search for that as part of the ULS logs or as part of the reporting services logs, and that'll take you exactly to the place where the user was starting to run into trouble. Okay. The second aspect is that users, when they receive error messages, will actually also receive an email message with the error so that they can find out that there's an error happening. So you'll be able to use those error messages that are available in those email messages also to investigate further. Lastly, we also talked about performance counters a little bit. So essentially, this will allow you to understand whether the alerting service is overloaded. So we provide the ability to monitor the length of the queue that we have. If the queue length continues to increase in an unbounded way, as an IT admin, you should react to that. And second, we also provide you the ability to see, because perf counters are at the node level, so within SharePoint you have a middle tier application, and that middle tier can have multiple nodes. Each node will have its distinct perf counters, and you'll be able to see whether or not one node is taking a lot of the load and other nodes are taking less load, and you'll be able to make sure that your system is harmoniously running in the background. Let's talk a little bit about scale and performance for alerting. I think the biggest thing to understand here is that when you run an alert, it's going to run the report. Now we try to optimize that, so we only run the data source queries necessary for getting the data feed related to that particular report, but that still invokes the query execution at the underlying database. So as an IT admin, you're going to want to watch for the data coming through the execution log and take steps such as caching the report or creating cache refresh plans for the report so that your users get the fastest experience possible, and also your underlying data sources are protected from the load that alerting will cause. I think there's another important thing to really think about for alerting is that alerting is designed for business intelligence scenarios. When we talk about that, we really mean that information workers have a cadence for when they get data, whether that's daily, weekly, or monthly. It's very seldom that an information worker actually needs data up to the minute. And when we talk about that, we really want to say that information or alerting is not designed for real-time scenarios. So if you need a solution that sends data to information workers every minute, the very second the data changes, a classic example could be like monitoring a stock ticker. This alerting solution is not for you. There's better technologies within the Microsoft stack, such as SQL Server Stream Insight, where you can build a very robust real-time system for tracking that kind of event-based data. And I'd highly recommend you look at that if you're really targeting real-time scenarios. So when alert rules run, they will cause load on the alerting database. And what that means is that you need to design, as an IT admin, you need to design the database storage correctly. You need to make sure that you've got the right disk architecture underneath the covers, and you've got enough memory for that SQL Server database so that it's going to run. As I mentioned before, because we run the T-SQL within the database, it's going to cause a lot more memory usage on that database tier than you would have previously experienced with reporting services. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention here is around how will the overall load on the report server change once you have alerting. This is a very interesting topic because it's going to be very organization specific. My feeling on this is that it's actually going to be, it will partially decrease some of the interactive report load and move that to a more predictable schedule as alerts. Now, the overall load may increase because people are running things much more consistently rather than accessing a report only when they absolutely have to. People will have a sort of safety net running every week to keep track of the metrics that are important to them. So you'll see I think you'll see more predictable reporting load overall, a little bit less spiky, and you might see a little bit of decrease in interactive report executions. But I think this will be very much specific to each organization, and so you should monitor this as part of rolling out alerts within your organization. Great. So I spoke a lot about the IT administrator. Now I really wanted to focus on data feeds. Data feeds is a foundational technology that we added actually as part of the previous SQL Server Reporting Services release, which was SQL Server 2008 R2. And this is a capability that is used today by Power Pivot to get data from reports so that you can create a tabular model. Now, we've reused this capability within self-service alerting to also get the data, and that actually provides us a lot of value. So now let's talk a little bit about these data feeds. So the first thing to say is that when you create a professional report, and a RDL report, each of the data regions, by default, provides a data feed. And what that means is that we can actually get the data out of the report exactly the way the user saw it in the report when they were viewing it. It's used for Power Pivot, and now it's used for alerting. And the data feed is in the OData format. And now we provide the data package in the OData format, but we don't provide a REST service around OData. And if you're familiar with OData and REST services, you would understand what that means. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about what this means to you. Report authors actually get to choose which data regions have data feeds. And the way they do that is by controlling some RDL properties, and I'll show you what those are in a second. So the first one is data element output. By default, it's on. It's actually auto, but it's on. And what that means is that each table or chart or each data region that you have in your report will expose a data feed. Okay, but you can turn that off. So if you don't want a particular chart to have to be exposed for users to create alerts on, you can absolutely go ahead and do that. So sometimes you might do that if there's too much data in that particular chart or in that particular table, and you don't want people creating massive alerts. The next part is that the report author gets to control the names of the individual columns, right? And so the report author is able to set this data element name property to have nicer column names. We try as best we can within reports to design nice names for things, but sometimes if you just drag a text box onto the design surface, the name's going to be like text box 1, that's not the best name for an information worker to create an alert on. So as a report author, you're able to go and customize those names. So I think that one thing that you're going to do is, as you design report, as you play with the alerting capabilities, you want to review the reports that you have before publishing them to make sure that they have nice names, and choose which data is actually exposed. So now let's go very quickly and show you what data feeds are. This is going to be very, very quick, I promise. And we're going to talk about what are data feeds, where are they used, and why data feeds matter. Okay? So first, let me go into my back into my SharePoint site, and we're going to go back into my professional report. So this is my project tracking report. This is just a normal SharePoint 2010 website. For those of you who didn't watch part 1, this is a basic professional report. And right here, up here, we have an export to data feed option. So this is the ability already that existed previously to export the data feed. Now for our alerts, we actually pull in the data from the data feed, and we show that in the alert designer. So this here, this task list, is a data feed, and this here in the preview is the data from that data feed. Okay, so that's why data feeds matter, is that we're actually using that data to show you an experience. So if the column names are well, crummy within your reports, they're going to show up crummy right here, and users will have a worse experience. So you do want to make sure the names of the data feeds and the names of the columns are appropriate for your users. Okay. Now let's take a look at how we actually accomplish that. I've launched the Report Builder 3.0. As I mentioned, self-service alerting works with all of the professional reports you've already designed within your organization. And so here's the particular report we were just looking at. Now I've highlighted a data region to start with. And what you'll notice here on the right-hand side is two little properties, right? So you have data element name and data element output. So on this data region, and also on any of the columns within that data region, I can choose whether this will be output or not. So I can say, yes, I want some output, or no, I don't want it. And that will effectively hide this or show this for the user in the alert designer. The second piece is the data element name here, which is the ability to have the name, and I've customized the name. Likewise, down here, I can do the same thing. So I can have, this is just the data that's coming from the report, and again, I have data element name and data element output. So if I want to hide a particular column, I can go ahead and do that. Great. So that's the basics of designing reports for use with alerts. So I know it was very quick, but what are data feeds and why do they matter? It's because they show up in the alert designer, and they actually are used by users to design their alerts. So if you have crummy data feeds, users are going to have a harder experience creating alerts with them. And so we also showed you how to go and change some of those settings. Wonderful. So that really pulls me to the end of the series of presentations. So let me summarize. We focused a lot on the IT admin in part 3, and also providing this key background information around data feeds to help you understand alerting. But also as part of part 1, we showed an in-depth demo of the alerting. We showed as part of part 2, we really dived into the individual feature set and the architecture. So I recommend you go back if you haven't already and go view those sessions. I want to leave you to summarize, with the idea that we have tried to deliver with self-service alerting in SharePoint, in SQL Server 2012, which is we really wanted to build a capability for information workers to get alerted about data changes that matter to them. It's a capability that allows information workers to cope with the information overload, to have a sort of safety net so that they don't miss crucial information changes that will help them or potentially hinder them in terms of getting their job done and being very proactive, responsive, and at the end of the day, productive. And we really targeted this capability at information workers to allow them to create the rules that help them get their own job done. At the time of the recording, the current release that's available for you to play with is SQL Server 2012 RC0. But I hope that by the time you view this, you'll have SQL Server 2012, the retail version available to you to play with. If you'd like some more information or you'd like to contact me, you can do that through my blog, and that's blogs.msdn.com/LUKASZP. thank you so much for spending for watching hopefully all 3 parts of this presentation. I look forward to hearing your feedback, and I'm very, very excited that you have the opportunity to use the self-service alerting in SQL Server 2012.